don't know what happened then, but my screen looked like I wasn't working anymore and I just disappeared. So if you could still see me, apologies, but kind of went a bit glitchy. And Pete's convinced it's because I said meta, which some kind of fear in Pete. Maybe it's because you mentioned meta. What? Did I mention meta, which has been widely advertised all over the world? Just that. I'm sure that's advertising, isn't it? It'd be good for them, although I don't want to be an avatar. I struggle quite a lot with using app games occasionally. I get stuck on levels that children of 6 can pass by without a problem, so I'm not imagining that will be the case. I remember I was at the point of saying to people who are new to this forum that if they want to ask a question, the best one is Facebook because it's very linear. I think that's when I got cut off, or it looked like I got cut off. So I would do that there during the live. You can also message me, as in privately, on my page, which means that I'll get to see it because Pete will send it to me, but nobody else will. That said, very friendly crowd. Very friendly crowd if it's your first time here, and you'll get very supported, so it'll be all right. Right, let's get on with it. Feel like I'm drifting from a friend, even though making an effort all the time. What else can you do? I'm so tired of trying so hard, yet missing the friendship. God, it's difficult that. I don't mean that it's a difficult one to answer. I mean, it's difficult. It feels really difficult. I think that friendships are like seasons at times. Not all of them. Some transition really effectively and they're navigated through the ages. My best friend who unfortunately died just 4 years ago, when I think about her, we managed to transition almost effortlessly through those seasons. And partly that was to do with history. I think history is a big part of it. You know, if you grew up with somebody, you connect very easily the threads of that experience. But when it comes down to growing up and then connecting with people, I think it can be more challenging. I think we can get these real intense moments where we just feel that we've got somebody who gets us. And it can be really inspiring and give us a heady sense of those really pure connections. And we're kind of reminded of a special time. A lot of us experience a very nostalgic connection because we engage in those lovely conversations and we want to spend every minute together. And of course, the problem with that is very often the intensity can't sustain itself. So it goes one of two ways. Either it plateaus to a place where you can kind of both agree that you only have this much time. And this much time is going to be enough, and you're going to really cultivate it and you grow it and you really spend time making sure that that little space that you have for one another remains really important. And if you can manage to negotiate that, that tends to work. What tends to happen problematically in these kind of friendships when one is waning is one wants more than the other. And the one who wants more than the other often sees the fact that it's not being reflected and replicated as a slur or a reason to feel that they're not required in the way that they wish to be required in a relationship. And I think that's not the way you should see it. Often it's just that the other person doesn't have the space to give you. So they'll let you inhabit a certain area, but they won't let you inhabit the space that you might desire. So if you can almost minimize your needs, which can be really difficult when you're in a friendship that you want to mean so much to you, but if you can pull back and say, okay, I feel like we are having a difference of opinion regarding where our friendship is going. And it's a hard conversation to have this, don't get me wrong. It's one I've had to have. I was really close to somebody in my earlier years when I was in Australia, and we had this really intense friendship and she mattered so much to me. And then her girlfriend came and they were kind of not in the most serious relationship until her girlfriend arrived, and it was kind of a surprise. I didn't know that she was going to arrive, and even the girl who I was living with at the time didn't really know that she was going to actually commit to coming. And it just changed everything. And I grieved really badly. I loved her. And we spent all our time together when she was free, and we worked and hung out, and she meant a lot to me. And then I had that taken away. And I can remember really dealing with what I would say a mix of resentment and a mix of grief, and like having to fundamentally have that conversation. And you know, you don't get the response you want because they can't give you what ultimately they were giving you before. But at the same time, being able to just express that that person had great meaning to me and I was going to miss her. And I always have missed her. Even now I think about that particular person. So you have to think about what your expectations are and can they be met? And if they can, to some degree, even though it might be on a smaller level, then it's worth staying in it, because often those relationships really thrive in the end and evolve. But if you get the sense that that person isn't committed to you as a friend, and friendships are relationships, they are like partnerships. Okay, they're not intimate, but they're really key to who we are and core to our being, then it can be really helpful to have that difficult conversation, because maybe they don't want to be involved with you anymore, and that's okay. Again, that isn't actually representative of you failing. We all go through phases, and like I said, friendships are like seasons, but broach that issue. Don't keep giving and then feeling resentful or upset or bitter or rejected because they're not returning it. You just have to stop giving it. And if you want to ideally broach that issue so that you can know the territory, that will give you a really key insight, because they might say, actually, I find you intense, or I haven't got that much time, or I don't know what you're talking about. But all of those will give you an opening to a conversation that you can have about it. But don't feel jaded about friendships. It's not very often that the reason the person doesn't want to be around you is because of you. It tends to be about the life issues that that person's experiencing. Or maybe the promises that the friendships seem to make that now aren't going to be fulfilled. That can happen as well, where an individual feels like they've promised too much and can't come up with the goods. But just appreciating that it's a difficult place and space to be. As we get older, it's harder to make friends. Definitely. It was my New Year's resolution in 2017. That was my New Year's resolution, that I wanted to make new friends, because when you haven't got the people in your life anymore that used to give you that meaning, you want to seek it out. And it's not easy, because it takes quite a lot to commit to a friendship, but it's well worth searching and seeking, even if at times you get let down. Please could I have a shout out? Aidan Evans. I will give you a shout out, Aidan Evans. Aidan, AD, I don't know which one of those it might be, but I'll call you Aidan Evans because that's what you specifically wrote. Thank you. You're saying that I'm inspiration and you're doing your degree because of me. Well, I very much appreciate that, but I'll just take you think I'm all right. But I like the idea that you think of me in that way. It's very kind. And I love that you're doing a degree because of me. And I appreciate that you shared that with me. And also, you just knock that degree out of the park and don't allow anybody to give you any limits. I'm very against limitations, no matter what other people think. Don't believe in limitations. You go out there, Aidan, you get what you want. Michelle. Hi, I need to learn how to deal with this overwhelming grief. I lost my dog and my nan last week and I'm heartbroken. Of course you are. You're a very bad assistant. It's a very bad assistant. Please feel free to send some aggressive remarks to Peter so that he can be aware of the impact of his, what can only be described as diabolically poor management of this situation. He's gone from an appraisal of perfect, from staff member of the month, to being on his second written warning.
I disagree.
No one cares what
I've
you
got a microphone.
No one cares what
Yes,
you
they do.
think. Now you're just the weird guy in the background. Anyway, back to the important issue. So, like I was saying about grief, you can't ever think that in these initial moments anything's going to make sense. And I wish I could give you like this perfect key to open the lock of how to just cope. It won't happen. It's like tinnitus. Anybody who listens to me talk about grief, ringing in your ears is tinnitus. That's grief. It's like screaming at you at the top of its voice, first of all, and it's going, they're dead, they're dead, they're dead, they're dead, they're dead. And then it gets quieter, but it's always there. And I lost Molly in childbirth. She was my perfect chihuahua. And by the way, before anybody's like, why do you breed dogs? I bred them because I wanted their puppies, right? I have 2 dogs that I adore, these particular ones. It was Molly and it was Wookie, and I wanted them to have puppies. I was giving one to my niece and I was having however many were left because I bloody love them. And let me tell you, chihuahuas are very highly addictive. So I had this complete connection with this dog where I was looking after her, and just every hour towards her labour was spent just loving her and stroking her and cuddling her. And then I lost her. And even now, even though it's 18 months nearly, I think about her all the time. And I think about my dad all the time. It's not quite as aggressively loud. There is a DNA within us, within our coping DNA, where we find a way forward because we've been doing it forever. We've been doing it for aeons. It's what makes us human. We have to live with loss. We have to undertake to do it joyfully in spite of that loss. But there is a lot of suffering in life. And I don't think we talk about it often. And I don't think that we equip people because we just want to all pretend that it's all going to be okay and we're all going to be happy and everyone's going to be content. And it's going to be great. And it's absolute bollocks. Life's really tough. And there are some really tough moments, and you're going through it right now. You're going through some of your really tough moments. And there's very little positives to draw apart from, one, you have to have known real love to feel real pain of loss. And that is the gift, the fact that you know what it's like to truly love. It's incredibly painful and brings a great deal of suffering, but you would not choose not to have had those moments with your nan and those beautiful moments with your animal. You wouldn't have done that. That's what makes you part of who you are. It's the fabric of your story. The narration of what you will become is because of the individuals that have created part of that story, both your dog and your nan. So one, you accept that that's part of it. And secondly, you trust. You trust that what this does is it teaches you some important lessons. I said to my youngest child, who struggled deeply with his mental health after my father died, and when we would sit together and he was despairing, as we all were, I would say to him, if there's one thing I promise you, it's that will never ever get harder than this. And I meant that, and I mean that. And it's small comfort to have to say to a child, it will never be worse than this. Life will never be as bad as this again. Because you don't want to fundamentally say that to anybody. But it's an honest truth. And it means that whenever he's in a new situation where he's scared or he's challenged or he's worried about failure or he's fearful of taking a risk, he knows that there is this benchmark of pain and he's survived it. And we all survive it in different ways, and we all struggle and suffer in different ways, and we're never the same as we were before. But it's just knowing that somehow we can utilise that and use it for its purpose, which is to teach us that life is fleeting, grief is always going to be part of fundamentally who we are. And that makes us need to think about how we fully live every single day. And the pain that you've got, you would never wish to deny because it's linked to your gran, it's linked to your dog. And as I said, when I read the eulogy at my best friend's funeral, I believe that we are connected transcendentally, interdimensionally with the people that we lose, with these threads. And one day those threads that feel very painful now will feel in the end a place of comfort to lead you back to the individual that you lost. That's my personal belief system. I have that bias, but it's important that I share that because I can't really give you advice without also putting myself in a position where I acknowledge that bias. They would be the things that I would consider right now whilst you're in the agony of this moment. But it's not going to be something you can rush, my love. And that's okay because you don't want to rush anything. When they tried to give my antidepressants after my dad killed himself, that was what they did immediately. we need to give you antidepressants. And my response to my doctors was, why would I wish to depress my pain? I want my pain. It's really important. It was pure. It belonged to me and my father. And I didn't want anyone to take that away. And I still don't want that to be taken away. I want it. It matters. It's exquisite. It's full of meaning. So try to see it that way as well. I'm really sorry that you've lost those two very important people in your life in that very short period of time. Can I have a shout out, please, to Darwin, as in Darwin, Australia? Matt McCormick. I don't know whether it's just Matt McCormick, but he's put Matt McCormick. Unless your parents were like, I really like the name Matt. Bloody love the name Matt. Do you know what's going to be better than calling our kid Matt? Let's call him Matt. Matt. If that's the case, I would think your parents were pretty awesome. But I lived in Darwin for a while. If it's in Australia, and we're talking about Northern Territory, favourite place. Even though you can get killed by everything in the water, like you go in the salt water and a crocodile eats you, or you get killed by a massive shark, or there's some horrendous jellyfish, and probably a spider that falls in off a cliff and just stings you and kills you as well. All of those things happen. That's what happens in Darwin. I still loved it. I did walk around bare feet. I did get attacked by quite a lot of very, very hot red ants, and do recall remembering that that was not a good move to make in the Northern Territory. Spent quite a lot of time at Kakadu. I hope it is the Darwin we're talking about. Otherwise, it's going to make no sense to anybody right now. I studied psychology to try and understand the abuser's mentality. Throughout that process, I found one of my abusers was also abused. I struggle with this. How common in the family cycle is abuse? How is it that this kind of generated abuse escalates, and yet the one person who breaks that cycle is the one black sheep? I broke that cycle, but do genetics mean this cycle may never end? So there's two distinct things there. One is your personal experience of being abused, and it's important to separate that from the fact that you also have been in a family where there has been an individual who themselves has been abused and then has gone on to be an abuser. What would I say to that? I'd say statistically, the likelihood of an abuser being somebody who's been abused is very high. So when somebody abuses somebody, if we look in their background, there is often a high level of trauma and an experience of being abused. However, statistically, how likely is it for a victim to become an abuser? Very low. So whilst we could say there's a higher proportion of individuals who carry out abuse who themselves were abused, there is a tiny proportion of victims of abuse who go on to become perpetrators of it. So the vast majority, it's a no. They would never. In fact, they would be absolutely find it abhorrent to even think about abusing somebody else. They go out of their way not to. They go out of their way to be compassionate, caring, nurturing people who often beat themselves up because somehow they want to take blame for something that was not even their fault. But the psychology of that victim is something that needs to be dealt with, and you need to work with that person so that they understand that they did nothing wrong and that they're the innocent individual in this system of experiencing their family. However, if you are the person who calls out a perpetrator in a family, often it's too much. It's completely wrong that people do this, but it's too much for that family to acknowledge the change that would happen if the abuser was seen as they are. So they often close ranks. It's reprehensible and it's not understandable as far as I'm concerned, but they close ranks. They decide that the individual who's called out the abuse is the person who's guilty, and they make them leave, because then they can keep all the other systems going. They can keep the parent in that place, they can keep the partner in that place. They live a lie and they know it. They also know it, but it means that they can keep this very solid foundation here by removing what they consider the problem, i.e. you. That's not on you, that's on them. And that is how systematic abuse continues, because obviously it gives access for the individual who's guilty to continue and perpetrate the abuse because they don't get the consequences of the actions. But that being said, the chances of it being a DNA issue, look, there are definite brain studies that seem to indicate that people, particularly who have a predilection for children, there are some connectivity issues in the brain, right? So there can be that issue. But we would have to do vast studies on vast amounts of the population to see whether in the non-offending population these issues existed as well. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to clarify whether that was just something that happened to be a common thread in perpetrators that they scan, but also could be a common thread in non-perpetrating individuals. And that's where it gets very confusing. So arguably, what you have to acknowledge is you don't think about it being more of a DNA, you think about it more of being a behaviour and an accepted behaviour that one person in that family carries out. And even if that person abused 6 or 7 other people, the chances of them becoming abusers is actually quite low, because most people who are victims hate being abused and don't want to hurt anybody else. But they're two separate issues. One is, no, you've been abused and you don't want to go out and abuse. So DNA, we can discount it if you're part of that theory. And secondly, yes, it's completely reprehensible that your family throws you out, because it's easy for them to cope with the fact that they can keep their systems in place and pretend that everything's okay. But you're left with the same issue. The issue is that you're by yourself dealing with the trauma of being abused. And that's really isolating, really abandoning, totally unfair, very unjust, but it's your reality. So when you're dealing with your reality, all of that extraneous noise is so irrelevant. It's not irrelevant to the way that you feel. It's irrelevant to the how do I figure that out? Because it remains a redundant position. They're always going to have done that to you, and it's never going to be acceptable. So it's almost like saying, I need to compartmentalize that. I need to see that I can't change that. It's certainly not my fault. I wouldn't have had it that way if I could have made it be the way I wished, but I can't. So what do I actually need to think about? Well, the focus is on myself, my trauma, and my healing. And there is almost a need to shut down any conversations in your head about the reasoning there. It's all wrong. That's all you need to know. You're the victim. Now it's your job, with help, to become the survivor. And they are extraneous noise. They really are. And it's hard and tough for me to say it in that way, but it's what you need to hear, because you're wasting energy and you're wasting all of the opportunities right now to start concentrating on yourself by thinking about them. And they don't deserve your thoughts, even though that's really painful. So I hope you are getting some help around that stuff, because that's a big thing to deal with by yourself. Okay, Emma, got a question for you now that you might be able to help me out. I can't open up to people, and any attempts ends in me shutting down without even saying half of what I wanted. So lots of people have different communication styles. Let's put it into context now. You have a problem opening up because you don't know how to express yourself in the moment in a way that you feel is heard, or is at least a position where you can start expanding on the way that you wish to be heard. But what you've just done is you've written to me. So communication can be lots of different ways. And actually writing it down and expressing it is a very powerful way to tell people how we feel. So my first thing would be, if you can write to me, then maybe it's time to think about writing to people who you know, who you actually want to express your feelings to in an uninterrupted fashion. That's the great thing about letters. It's one of the biggest things that I think we've probably lost in our society. It's the art of silent communication and the art of being able to process that when receiving it, and then really cultivate an actual response that matters to you and that has time to be ingested. So arguably, I would say if you struggle to communicate and open up, one, you're being taught to get better at that, because that's where the struggle exists. We get better at it when we practice it more and more and more. And when we're struggling to open up, it's because we feel that we are closed, and therefore we need to again practice, because you're taking a risk. When you open up, one, the person might not hear it correctly. Secondly, they might give you some really bum advice. That's happened many a time in my life, and I'm sure in your life. Third, they might not really care. There are all these questions that we pose in our mind when we're thinking about opening up. And the reason that I think we should not have those thoughts and feelings about the way that we behave is because it's not necessarily about anything to do with the response. I know that's hard because we live in a world where we're really concerned a lot about what other people think of us. It's terrible that we are, and it's certainly something that many of you may note I don't necessarily struggle as much with. The great thing about being in my situation is you get used to a lot of people being proper tossers to you. And in the end, you have to make a conscious and concerted effort to think, do I care? unless obviously you genuinely have done something really wrong, in which case you should, but pretty much I don't. It's practice that makes you think that way. And also it's, hang on, what I'm giving into the world is something that matters to me. And if the person doesn't know how to respond to me or react well to me, that's okay. It's about me allowing myself to say that stuff, speak my truth, express myself. It's about me knowing it's all right, no matter how it's received, to acknowledge that it's appropriate and acceptable to discuss whatever it is I feel. And it's hard for people who haven't opened up to take that on board, because you fear the consequences of just being completely authentic, for fear that you do get rejected. But my argument is, it's not that big a deal to have somebody hear what you say and not get it how you wish to have it heard, because the lesson isn't in that. For me, the bigger thing is that you just express yourself fully. And if they get it wrong, it's cool, you can always correct them. When my dad killed himself, I made an effort to pretty much tell anybody I met about it, because I needed to say it, I needed to speak it, I needed to express it. It needed to become something solid and founded in my life. And then they got better over time at knowing how to respond, because they were so not used to having that kind of really deep conversation. It's shocking for them. So they got better. So there was this dual education experience, whereas I'm affirming my reality and they're learning how to step into somebody's reality that they've not been in or within before. So that is something I express to you. Don't do it for another person to give you permission. Don't do it for another person to analyze. Don't do it even for another person to meet you in a way that feels like you've got what you need. Instead, do it because you're educating yourself to take courage in those steps. And it works. The more that you just start saying, this is who I am, this is how I feel, this is what I struggle with, I'm worried that I don't know how to express myself confidently in this group, or I don't know what to say in this circumstance and I'm worried about saying the wrong thing. People are unbelievably receptive on the whole to that kind of information. And like I said, if you can't do it that way, then start writing it, because you clearly can write and you're eloquent within that. So you already have that advantage. So make use of it. Communication is whatever style works for us, whatever way it works, per se. Hi Emma, in your clinic tonight, would you talk about, oh sorry, I'm getting told off now because I've missed one, I apologise. Oh, it's getting very shirty now. Just be careful, you're on your final warning, mate. You're not, because I don't know how to use any of the equipment, so you have all the power. He's doing some really inappropriate finger signs at me right now. And now he's got a banana, I'm not going to say anything, there's something very odd going on in that corner. Caroline, Emma, I'm beyond empathic in character. I feel it's a curse instead of a gift sometimes. I literally feel everything. What can I do to balance out my sensitivity? So, empathy and sensitivity are separate issues. So, empathy is the capacity to understand, at least as far as we believe we can, the experience of another human being, so that we can, to some degree, sense and help them solve the way that they experience the world without feeling sympathetic or pity for them to some degree. So it's an empowering position. We feel it, but we don't drown within it, right? If we're drowning within it, we're not being useful. So I would give an image of an empathetic experience that if you had an individual drowning, the sympathetic person, the oversensitive person, would get in the water with them and they would both drown, because there aren't boundaries there. The empathetic position would be to go to the side, to lie down, to get a stick out and say, when you're ready, you just grab onto that stick, and then they would wait for the person to pull themselves out. So you're still with them, but in one you sink and in one you remain safe. So it sounds like what's happening right now is that when you are being sensitive to somebody, less sympathy, more sympathy than empathy, so to speak. So it's not that you're not feeling empathetic, it's that the sympathetic side of your nature is taken over. So therefore you feel it, you want to heal it, but you don't necessarily know how to all the time. And then you feel terrible because you've not been able to meet the needs of that individual, and that drags you down. And then you feel guilty. And then that feeling of guilt makes you feel like a terrible person and you've been useless. And now you're beating yourself up. So you've got this big cycle where in the end, you don't get to do the job you wish. And you also, even though all you were doing was trying to be a good human, now feel terrible for being a good human. So how do you change that? So first of all, you have to stop feeling responsible for everybody else in the world around you. That means that when somebody says something that might hurt you usually, even though you've tried really hard to make a difference, you acknowledge that that's okay. People are allowed to have their opinions. They're not facts. You don't have to take those in and ingest them. Secondly, that when you've got to a point where you're exhausted and you haven't really got a lot to give, you learn to say no, which is almost impossible for somebody who is genuinely a caring pleaser, because it goes against the very grain of what your agreeability personality is about. And being agreeable is lovely. We love people who are agreeable, but they're really bad at knowing how to say no. So you have to create appropriate boundaries, which is learn to know where you exist within what you have to offer, and learn to accept that it's not okay to go into those reserves. The reserves that you have within you are for you. That's it. So essentially, prioritize. Who are the people in your life that you really want to be empathetic to? How much time can you really offer them? What do you self-care and give opportunity to yourself to make sure that you have time to look after your needs? Who do you reach out to? Where do you fill that petrol tank with your own possibilities of time out? Because if you don't have all that in place, you're going to always feel like you're going underwater, because you're always going to be giving to the next person and the next person and the next person. The thing is, if you have that pleasing nature, and pleasers are like that, there will always be a queue waiting to use you, not because they're bad people, but because when we find somebody who's constantly giving, we want to take, because the world, believe me, is not full of people constantly giving. So you have to pull back and be aware of your time boundaries, your priorities, your own personal schedule for the self, and then the what can I really do here? The asking yourself, what is it that I can really do? Because if it's this person's getting divorced, I need to solve their issues, you're going to fail. If it's this person's just lost somebody, they need somebody to be their all-encompassing light so they can survive it, you're going to fail. There are always going to be propositions that are way too big for you. And no matter how empathic you are or sympathetic you are, you will fail. So you have to pick up, what is it that I think I have the power to change or do here that is useful? And it might be the woman across the road who's lost the partner, who's beside herself and just needs company 24/7. You're going to give her 1 hour, and that hour is going to be really special, and you're going to take over pot roast and you're going to sit with her and let her cry, and then you're going to go home and you're going to look after yourself and your own brood, because that's about meeting the needs whilst also retaining your own sense of self and your own personal boundaries. So they're the things that I'd look at doing. Learning to say no is a powerful tool, and it's something that I have learned more and more the capacity to do without shame or guilt, in a society that particularly makes females believe that if they're not meeting the needs of everybody around them, somehow they're failing. James, you're so low and feeling so alone. They say a successful person should not feel this way, but I do. Help, please. Okay, so James, first of all, you feel so low and so alone. So what you're being taught there is a desire for connection. That's number one. So that isn't a bad thing to feel. Yes, everybody listening will be like, that feels really bad. I'm like, yes, I know it does. But it's not the feeling that's the issue. It's the motivation that lies within the feeling that's important. It's the emotional prompt. You're feeling alone because you need connection. So number one is, how are you prioritizing your social experience? Do you feel isolated? Do you feel that people who are meant to be in your life aren't meeting your needs? Do you not have that many friends? Do you want a partner? Is there some intimacy issues where really it's time for you to start actually actively going out and seeking connection? Because that is really powerful. Secondly, look, when we feel really depressed, it does not matter how successful we are. It doesn't matter whether we're bringing in £250,000 a year. And everyone around us thinks that our job's incredible, our home's beautiful, our car's fabulous, our dog is so well behaved that it could probably win Britain's Got Talent. None of that matters because you're not actually caring about those issues. That's the insight it's giving you. So when people think that somebody's successful because they've got A, B, and C, that's only successful for the person experiencing that A, B, and C if it has the value and meaning. So you can have a brilliant career, but if your purpose and value isn't within that, if that isn't what inspires you and feeds you and brings you to life, then you can spend your entire life doing it and you're never going to get that significance. So what do I think makes people happier? Well, first of all, I know that I'm going to go back to what I said about walking before, but I would say to anybody who comes on my channel at the moment, if there's one thing that you can do to change your state a little bit, go out for an hour and a half and walk every day and then come back to me and say you feel as depressed as you did last week. You might do, but I've got a really strong feeling that you won't. You might not feel amazing, but you might just feel a little bit better. And the key here is when you feel a little bit better, it tells you that there is an opportunity to motivate change through action. That's one. Secondly, what is purpose? Purpose is what you give to the world. So it's not what you're given from it. It's about your responsibilities. Are you taking on the responsibilities in your world that make you feel inspired? What do you do with your time? Are you actually giving your life the meaning that you require it to have by doing the things that really inspire you? And we might have a fabulous job that we can just go through the motions of doing, but it just does not inspire us. This inspires me a lot more when I'm talking to you guys than many of the things that I do. That's why I always do this, because when I do this, I feel that I have something that I'm sharing that gives me purpose, and also I'm gaining a sense of purpose from you, and also I feel that my time has value. That's really powerful, and it's got nothing to do with money and everything to do with meaning. So what are your priorities and goals that actually are about what you desire? Not what other people look in and say, positive strokes, that's amazing, well done. What is it you might want something completely different than everybody that looks at your life. You might want to go and do something incredibly different with your world. And if you start thinking that way and taking those responsibilities and being accountable to those feelings that you have and saying, okay, I feel accountable to these feelings. Actually, being lonely is my choice. And even though aloneness feels awful, so many of us choose it because we think that the effort it takes to move out of that state is scary. We might get rejected, we might get abandoned, we might confirm the fact that no one wants to hang around us, but that's just all absolute collateral nonsense. It's not real. That's just fear. That's the critical voice. If we start making goals, shifting through those gears and actually articulating action that's gonna bring us positive change, then in the end, we get where we need to go. So your feeling alone and low is en route to feeling found and connected and motivated. But you have to feel the feelings that you're experiencing now to know that you're getting signals that something needs to change. And instead of sinking into the feelings and thinking, God, there's something broken, awful about who I am, that I feel this way in spite of my success, listen. Your psyche, your emotions, your psychology, they're saying, you know what? We've got all this great stuff. It's not feeding me in the way I want. What are we going to do to change that? And if we start asking ourselves those questions instead of fearing the way it feels when things don't feel great, then we're never actually going to have to be afraid because we're always going to be moving forward, listening to our absolute core of being, which is what's happening to you now. And remember, you're not alone, because if you were genuinely alone, you wouldn't have written that now and had this response, or have a community that are probably relating to you. So the idea that you're alone is different to the reality. And if you can do what you've done tonight and express it here, you can express it in real life. And if you can express that feeling in real life and then motivate to prioritize and change, you can move through that. Not to say for 1 minute you're not entitled to the feelings, by the way. I'm just saying that they're prompts. They're not here to suffocate and squeeze you into a position of helplessness. They're here to say, this is what you need to know so that tomorrow we can start moving through it. They're the things that I think you probably need to hear more than me just saying, oh, that's really awful. My partner Glenn needs to ask advice. He can't open up about the death of his auntie, and his mum is in the same. He doesn't open up. Can you offer him advice, please? Well, one of the things there you've got is if mum is somebody who doesn't really open up, then you've probably not been brought up in a way where it's as simple as to just say how you feel. I think that it takes a lot of practice to just be able to acknowledge. And if you've had a parent who's loving and caring but just doesn't know how to talk about feelings, and there are so many people like that, then you've not arguably had the education and the freedom to just express. So you have to make a choice at that point. There is nobody who cannot express themselves. There is nobody who cannot express their feelings. What there are spectrums of struggle in doing that. So your partner has a bigger struggle than potentially you have in expressing it, but it's completely possible. And I suppose the most important thing is to think about expression on different levels. So somebody like myself, I would express myself in speaking or writing. My partner's really creative, so he could probably express himself in a whole range of ways, from creating art to writing things that are really different to what I'd be capable of doing, to building stuff, to just being a person who can express himself in more of an artistic and creative fashion. So there's no reason why opening up cannot involve things that initially feel a little bit easier for somebody to use. And so what is it that he feels is most comfortable when he's thinking about how in the past he's expressed himself? Because we all do it every single day of the week. We express ourselves to some degree. What is it that he's in the most comfortable position of doing? You know, when is it that he feels most relaxed? And then the other thing is, well, you don't really get to experience breakthroughs without challenge. So right now, he's dealing with the death of his auntie. It's a murky area. No one knows what to say. No one knows quite how to express themselves during that period of time. No one knows how to deal with the pain perfectly. It's just a work in progress. But starting to just say that is enough. So with his mother, it would just be a case of, we are really bad at talking about this, aren't we, Mum? Because that's an expression of reality. And then Mum can go, yeah, we are. And he can say, we need to get better at this, because that is an acknowledgement of a need to change. And then from there it can be, do you think we need to just have a conversation about how sad it is that she isn't here anymore? And those very simple statements, as opposed to deep connected experience and shared stories and the bigger pictures of how it feels existentially to actually be a human dealing with loss, you can get to that way down the line. Just a really honest conversation about, we're not good at this. We need to get better. Maybe we just need to bring her into the room. Maybe we need to get some pictures out and just cry. Because those things that provoke those feelings often come in the form of physical memories. Pictures, sentimental items, videos, whatever it is that you have that is tangible and palpable for that moment. So nobody is terrible at expressing themselves. It's just some have a distance to go in allowing themselves to do it because they've decided that they've left it too late or that others are better. But we have mouths, we have hearts, we have brains, we have emotions, we have potential to do all those things. And actually, like I said, the biggest breakthroughs always arrive from the biggest challenges. So the more challenging you find an experience, the more growth and learning there is within it, I promise you. How do you escape domestic abuse? When there's emotional ties, can't help loving someone even if they hurt you. So, love can be bad love. I think that when we say to somebody, you're in a domestically abusive relationship, leave, and we don't understand when they say that they feel love for that person or that person loves them, there is this idea, well, they can't love you if they're hurting you. And if only it were that simple. And I think that it's a myth, and I think it's really negative to say to somebody who is in a domestically abusive relationship that the person who is with them doesn't love them. Because then that denies their experience and it rejects and abandons their feelings that are very, very real. What I would say is that person probably does love you, but they don't have the resources required to manage love in a positive way, which is good. And unfortunately, when it's bad love, it can be highly abusive, highly toxic, highly controlling, and consistently leave the individual who is on the other side of that relationship feeling confused, broken, hurt, abandoned, and often desperate to change it back to how it was in the early days. That's one of the things that we tend to see, that most people in domestically abusive relationships had a period of like 6 months maybe, sometimes longer, where that person that they fell for was incredibly loving, incredibly kind, incredibly caring, and all the while that they're getting hurt and hit and beaten or abused coercively, they're constantly hoping that they can just switch them back to how it was. And that's bad love, because people can behave for a period of time, but when it falls out of that and they're acting this way, yes, they love you, but they can also kill you. And that's unfortunately the way that we have to consider it. So they love you, but they can also murder you. And then it's about, well, what accountability and responsibility do you have to you? Because if you're saying that you are willing to put up with a position where somebody else uses you as a punching bag, then you're making choices to value yourself so little. And that comes from probably a traumatic experience throughout childhood, poor role models, abuse in the home prior to this. These are all foundational issues that cause pain. Now, the easiest thing to say to you is getting away and putting distance between you and that relationship is key to healing. It really is. And getting support within that is also key to healing. But working out how you're going to achieve that when you still have these feelings is really challenging, which is why people like refuge, etc., all exist, because of the fact that women and men do struggle with this situation. You love freely and carefully. No, so you love freely and you love in a compassionate way, and you care for people who are a little bit, shall we say, less able to give the same gifts that you bestow on others. The fact that you have that within you means that you can live a really good life with somebody who deserves you. And the person who deserves you isn't the person who beats you. The person who deserves you is the person who will feel thrilled, absolutely thrilled, that you exist and that you care and that you are concerned about them and that you want to be with them. And I can say this all night, but it's never going to make it easier for you, the idea of breaking away from that bad love, because that bad love will have been intoxicating at some point. And what I'm telling you is you have to go through a really painful grief process, and you also have to go, God, it's happened to me again potentially, because usually when it's the domestically abusive relationship that gets this way, I can often track back there's been other relationships that have maybe been problematic and you've been a victim within them. So you're used to that. And so you then start blaming you and think that you're the one who's wrong. You're the one who should know better. You're the one who's got yourself in this position again. And it's not, it's just that you've got forgiving boundaries. You're just one of those people who accept less than you deserve and then convince yourself that the reason that you've accepted less than you deserve is because you deserve it. And the cycle is to acknowledge that it's painful and it's really grief-striking to walk away from these things when you've invested so much. But it's because you matter, and to accept that you matter, even if that means being cost of the relationship that you dearly loved. Say that again, Pete. Pete was just talking to himself then. Is there any specific reason for interrupting that train of thought? You're on a bad night tonight, aren't you? If it's not bad enough that you've got those terrible clothes on. Hi Emma, I'm in your clinic tonight. Would you talk about... Oh, and I've seen that one. Mending a... Oh, no, yeah, I have. That's one. Hi Emma, in your clinic tonight. Please would you talk about mending a broken heart? I met a lovely bloke, but he doesn't make me laugh. He was quite an introverted man, and I love to have a deep conversation and laughter. It's so hard. I had to end the relationship, and when they're such a lovely person, it's not quite right for you. I had a gut feeling after 2 months. Now it's 5 months, and it's become too strong to ignore. I'm absolutely devastated and heartbroken. I can't stop crying. Please, can you advise me? The pain is unbearable. I'm going to die all alone. We had lots in common. There were just aching feeling in my gut that wouldn't go. He loved me deeply. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Let me go back to halfway through the paragraph. So hard to end a relationship when there's such a lovely person but are not quite right for you. I had a gut feeling after 2 months. Now it's 5 months and it's become too strong to ignore. I'm absolutely devastated and heartbroken. I can't stop crying. Please, can you advise me? The pain is unbearable. I'm going to die all alone. We had lots in common. There was just an aching feeling in my gut that wouldn't go. He loved me deeply. So, okay. I mean, we've got a big spectrum there, haven't we? We've gone from with a guy, in a relationship, didn't really make me laugh. Had a lot of conversations that were cool, but there was just something not right there. So you break off with him, which kind of makes sense from what you're saying. And then after a few months, you start making a decision in your head that there is a mistake and maybe this is the one that got away. But we've gone from there, which is a reasonable feeling. That's a reasonable feeling. We can break off a relationship and then think, that person might have been all right, actually. That's cool. But you've now gone on steroids emotionally and you're like, I'm going to die alone, probably in a flat. They'll find me after my cats have ate me. That's where you've gone. I added the bits in about the cats, by the way. Don't add that to your vision. That's not realistic. It's not realistic at all. You've met somebody before without a problem. You had a relationship. You just told me about it. He was madly in love with you. So this idea that you're now in a flat on your own is just completely outrageous when it comes down to reality. So can we just drag it back? We're not in the flat. We're bringing it back to reality, which is right now. What you're talking about is, do I have regrets? Now, I don't know how to answer this one because it seems like you had a really clear reason for not being in the relationship. Like, he sounds like a great guy and a good friend, but I'm not getting there. My socks were blown off by our sexual compatibility and the enigmatic experience and energy of his charisma, and I just loved being around him, and I wish I hadn't ended it that way. It feels a little bit more like now I've had time to think about it, maybe I acted in haste, and that's okay. That's okay. You might not have, by the way. Let me add this in, because I feel we're getting a bit bundled up with this idea of, oh my God, what if I never meet anybody else again? Quick, run back to the relationship that was good but not great because it felt safe. Now, again, that might be the right thing to do, which is point one. Why don't you call him? Just call him. Give him a call. I'm really sorry. I've had 5 months to reflect on it. Do you know what? I think I might have made a mistake. You will be amazed at how many people find that incredibly alluring. When an ex calls and says, 5 months to process, I am not sure I made the right decision. I'm really sorry that I screwed with your feelings. I'm really sorry I put you monumentally through heartbreak. But I've had a lot of time to think and I need to have a conversation about this with you. And you just do it. And they might be like, well, I got really hurt and I'm not in that space anymore. And you have to gracefully and willingly accept that, knowing that you at least made the effort to figure it forward. If, however, they do say, okay, let's meet up, let's have a conversation, you may well go back to that situation and spend a few months with them and realize that you were right. And if that's the case, it will be okay too, because life happens and we do those things. We go back and we realize we were right in the first place. But the bigger issue is not that. It's to do with this completely unrealistic idea that because this relationship didn't work out and you ended it, that somehow the universes have now conspired for you never to be happy again. That's not true. If you want to get dating again and meet somebody who you feel is going to be able to be your life partner, then you just need to start putting it out there. Whether that's asking your mates, whether they know anybody who's single who you'd connect with, or going online and going on some dating apps and just getting out there and dating and meeting people, whether it's joining some interest groups and just putting yourself in a position where you're being open. There are ways that you'll meet somebody. Of course you will. It's human nature. 90% of the time, we don't even know we want it, and then it walks into our life, let alone when we're actively seeking it. But if this guy is somebody that you have unfinished business with, just tell them. But also acknowledge that the hysteria and fear that you're feeling right now about being alone is not realistic. That's just the sum of the festering of those worries that you suddenly have decided might come to fruition. The idea that you're going to end up alone and lonely just isn't realistic. It's just not realistic at all. So just know that. Right, chaps, I will see you again next week. I hope we've had an okay time tonight. Appreciate all of your interaction and engagement, and also questions really interesting tonight and so diverse. So thank you for sharing it with me. Take care, be safe, be nice to each other, even though online right now it is a toxic bed of division, isn't it? It's like, just stop telling me what to do with myself. But apart from that, let's just all remember we have far more that connects us and separates us. Let's concentrate on that. Take care, my lovelies. See you soon.